Welcome to FYI, the For-Your Innovation podcast. This show offers an intellectual discussion on technologically enabled disruption, because investing in innovation starts with understanding it. To learn more, visit arc-invest.com.
ARK Invest is a registered investment advisor focused on investing in disruptive innovation. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. It does not constitute, either explicitly or implicitly, any provision of services or products by ARK. All statements made regarding companies or securities are strictly beliefs and points of view held by ARK or podcast guests, and are not endorsements or recommendations by ARK to buy, sell, or hold any security. Clients of ARK Investment Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
From ARK Invest, this is FYI, the For Your Innovation podcast. I'm Brett Winton. I'm joined today with Lorenzo, our Director of Research for Digital Assets. Hi, Lorenzo. How are you?
Good.
Okay, so today we're talking to Sandeep Nailwal, who is the co-founder of Polygon, which is, I actually don't know what it is, but I think it's a sidechain that's also a level 2. Lorenzo, I think it would be helpful for me if you could define for me, what is an L1 or layer 1 blockchain? What is an L2 blockchain? What is a sidechain? Why do we have so many different names for all of these things?
Polygon is really one of the first teams that spearheaded Ethereum scaling roadmap, right? So the layer 1 is really a blockchain where you can run applications on top of it. And really what the layer 1 does, and the nodes, the validators, they compute the transactions, they agree on the transactions, and they broadcast them, and they store them, right? This has obviously a limit, right? If you want to keep the number of validators broad enough and decentralized enough, they can store, infinite data and compute, right? Without requiring like huge hardware requirements, basically. And so what really Sandeep and Polygon thought about, this was like, I think their first round was like in 17, 18. So they've been building for years now, is really, hey, we need to have this dedicated blockchain where we're actually going to run the transactions, we're going to batch them, and we're going to post proof onto the Ethereum, their layer 1 blockchain. So we're going to be able to inherit the same security as Ethereum, but the fees are going to be much lower and the throughput is going to be much higher because we're going to be able to batch the transactions, and we don't need as many validators.
You don't get like actually the same security, as in you get the security intermittently, but not in between. As in, I'm trusting Polygon to batch and settle the transactions along the way. If something goes wrong in that, things could get mangled there. But once it's like kind of batched into the Ethereum chain, then I get the security of the underlying settlement layer of the Ethereum chain.
You're right. There's more latency, and I think for the optimistic rollups, which are a subset of L2s, you actually have a window of 10 days, right, to the proof to be kind of verified on Ethereum. So all of that is kind of being worked on. Zero knowledge proofs, which are more computationally heavy, but you post the proof directly on L1s, are kind of different trade-offs. But you're right, Brett. Like, they don't have exactly the same guarantees as if you were doing like a transaction on the Ethereum layer 1.
Right. It's kind of like if you and I were betting on things and we just kept on a piece of paper like, hey, I'm betting on this and you're ahead and I'm ahead, and we have it written down on a piece of paper, but then every couple of weeks we actually exchange the money, right? And if like between those 2 weeks, suddenly I like abscond, I'm like, all right, see you, I'm not going to do it. That's the, you still have the piece of paper, but the piece of paper is like on Polygon versus on underlying Ethereum. So there's some like,
You're trusting basically the validators on Polygon for that piece of paper, like in between periods, which obviously don't have the same security guarantees as the ETH validators, right? Which are much more decentralized. They have more at stake, and it's obviously a network that's been running for years. So yes.
Why do we only have layer 1 and layer 2? Why aren't there layer 3s and layer 4s and layer 6s?
I actually think people have built like layer 3s. Like, you really get into the nitty gritty, like technical, what is, like a layer 3 that basically post the proof onto the layer 2, which then onto the layer 1. I think people have tried that. I just think it gets really, really complicated in terms of liquidity and tokens and fragmentation. So yeah, I think right now most of the projects are actually trying to scale the layer 1 and layer 2, right? So like either increase kind of hardware requirements or improve, like network aspects to make it like faster and cheaper, rather than basically putting on top like more layers.
I mean, it seems like there are a few additional layer 1 announcements, some of which more like, hey, we're going to do a corporate like database basically that we're pretending is a blockchain, some of which are more, call it decentralized, or you could imagine people trustlessly developing to them. In your vision of the future, do we have like 20 layer 1s? Do we have just Bitcoin? Do we have like Bitcoin and Ethereum and maybe Solana? And how does that intersect with a vision of the future for the layer 2s that sit on top of these things? It seems so kind of complicated and interconnected in ways that are somewhat unpredictable.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think honestly, like the terminology like L1, L2, like if you look back, this was something I was looking at the other day, like Polygon, Arbitrum, Optimism, they started building like in 2017. Like it took them like years to build the L2, right? Like you had to build everything. And now like the infra is so mature and you have these SDK kind of out of the box that Robinhood could just say, hey, I'm going to use like the Arbitrum SDK and I'm going to build this like in a week, right? I think we're going to get to an end state where you're going to launch the L2 as if it were like an application, like basically in a day, right? And you're not really going to see the difference between L2 application. And so I think it's just going to become more, just more, way easier to build and launch applications. And we're not going to see the difference between L2s. I think are just going to become like apps basically, right? And they're going to push the proof onto the L1. How many L1s we're going to have? I think it's a good question, right? Like with, as you said, the corporate chains like Arc, Stripe. My gut feeling says, like in network and capital, there's always like network effects, right? Like we have hundreds of currencies, but like half of the trades in the world are in US dollars and the other 20% are in euros. And then the long tail has kind of like 10%. And so I think it's just very hard to imagine like something very different to that, to me.
Wouldn't the same argument apply to L2s? Or it's kind of like the layer 2 can provide certain like execution or throughput characteristics that are well matched to the application that needs to build on top of it. And so then therefore you have kind of L2 mapping to specific kind of financial use cases to a much greater degree.
I think so. What we've seen right now is a lot of these applications. If you see WorldCoin, they launched they launched on Optimism, on the general purpose chain L2, and then after a couple of months they say, hey, like we don't want to share block space, like let's take the SDK and we'll build an L2 just for us, right? Base is basically doing the same. Robinhood is taking the Arbitrum. Like Robinhood could have built like on Arbitrum general L2, but they don't want to share the block space. They want like full control. And so they took the SDK and they built their own chain. And so ultimately it's just going to be, hey, like what are the best platforms, right? Like the best applications. Like ultimately the user is going to be using that. And I think those are going to be the L2s or the apps that are going to have the most usage.
Take Robinhood, for example. So for Robinhood, I'm just counting on Robinhood to successfully write down the piece of paper, but then they are settling back to, I guess, Ethereum at the end of things, right? So it's a similar concept. It's just, then I'm just like being like, I hope your database is right and I'm trusting on it being right. And I'm accepting the fact that Robinhood could like censor my transactions. And maybe over time they have a way that they're going to make it like it's not purely dependent upon them to be the, call it the validator for that L2. But it does seem like teams like Polygons have done a lot of work to figure out how to make this work, and Optimism and others are like, oh, thank you for doing all that work. Now we're going to use our distribution to then borrow, basically take that work you've done, and now that people know it works, we're going to use our distribution to
That's exactly
basically
right.
provide
I think the big question for me, especially with projects like Arc and Stripe and like Tempo, the Stripe blockchain, is like, I think the missing piece there, and like Sandeep talked about this, is like credible neutrality. Is like, do we think like other big financial institutions are actually going to want to build on a blockchain that is kind of built by Stripe, and where they know someday they're gonna say, hey, we don't like this transaction, or somehow, we're giving priority to this party. And like, so do you think like, companies are going to build a lot of infra, they're going to, have a lot of resources building on a chain that is not really theirs, right? That is kind of, I think that's where like credible neutrality and actually being able to know for sure that the base layer where you execute is neutral is actually important. And so I think that's what Sandeep said is like, if you're building only for your users, right? Like Stripe is building only for Stripe users, that's okay. I think if Circle is doing the same thing, but I think it's going to be challenging to onboard, other brokers, exchanges, like financial institutions onto the platform and actually, allocate capital and resources on building on something that, they're not sure if they have full control of it. So I think that's the big question.
Yeah. And just to continue with my like keeping notes on a piece of paper analogy, the reason a user, or it would be challenging for a layer two, is if it's too narrow, kind of like a set of users or a use case, then you have like this paper ledger stuck there, and you need actually the money there to transfer over to another layer two application. Well, how do you do that? You have to wait for it to clear and settle, and then you have to move it over, or you have to do basically like a bridge between them where you're comparing pieces of paper and like, I'm going to transfer these little marks over to here. And that's effectively either expensive or latent to do, right? And so that's why even at the layer two level, you would expect there to be some kind of minimum size or liquidity that you'd need on an application for it to justify having a layer two built up.
Correct. That's exactly what's happening. And I think that's why a lot of people are, they're complaining about the L2 roadmap for Ethereum just because of the liquidity, right? And there are projects like Layer Zero across, like there's a bunch of teams that are building like connectivity and bridges between the L2s. But then obviously you end up kind of having to trust, the bridge, right? Exactly. And so that's why bridges
if the bridge
been
collapses while you're going over it,
exactly,
then that's a problem for you. Yeah.
And like these bridges can hold a lot of money, obviously, right? And so they've been like a huge honeypot, like in the industry for hacks. If you look at the hacks, bridges have been, I think, 80% of the capital basically hacked. And so, again, like I think, this is not going like too deep into the weeds. Like the Ethereum Foundation and Ethereum, like they're thinking about, native, what they call like native rollups, which are basically rollups where the piece of paper and the validator is kept by the L1 validator, right? So they do both like computation for the L1 and they also for the L2. And so they basically have a unique kind of ledger, right? The only problem is obviously Ethereum blocks are like a few seconds between each other and the L2s are much faster. And so you need like guarantees, obviously, in terms of latency. And so there's just another bunch of problems that are created because of that. But I think you're exactly right. Right now, it's still like very fragmented, and you still need to navigate between like all the L2s. And so, yeah.
Final question, then we'll get to the interview. But it seems like across these various teams, sometimes they attach a token to these efforts and sometimes they don't. How do I understand why and what? Like Polygon has a token, Base does not have a token, but they're rumored to have a token. What are we doing here? Like, help me understand the strategic dynamics there.
It's a good question. I think so. Most of the teams that are not publicly traded companies like Polygon, Arbitrum, Optimism, they have a token, right? All of them launched a token. This was the main kind of way to fundraise, and for some of them kind of to secure the network. So the token has kind of utility. What we've seen for publicly traded companies that have launched like networks, so like Coinbase, Robinhood, even like Ant Financial and others, they don't have a token. I think that's just like for regulatory reasons why. I would imagine like if you were to have a token, you would need to give some to like the Coinbase stockholders, right? Like you have like fiduciary duty and like, so I think it's just like regulatory wise. I'm not sure like if Brian and Jesse have actually said that Base is eventually going to have a token. I think they will. They're going to find a way. But I think that just been that has been regulation mainly.
The reason you would need to have a token, aside from capital raising efficiency, which is maybe like a quasi reason, the reason you would need to is to meaningfully decentralize the network. You need to have something that people can hold in order to play along in the security game in some way. And so it's fine if Robinhood's the only set of validators, well, then they can do it on their own. And even if they're like dealing people in explicitly, maybe there's a way that they can incentivize them that doesn't require a token economics model, though people would have to really trust them in that circumstance. But as you say, hey, this is really something that you, not just Robinhood, but other institutions can rely upon for, sub-settlement mechanism that then clears to a true settlement layer, then you need a token to be like, this is how we are kind of like making sure the incentive structures around securing the network work. Is that the right way to think about it?
Exactly. Right now, like these L2s like Base, Arbitrum, they have one sequencer, one validator node, which is the company, right? And so they decide how the transactions are ordered and everything. If they want to decentralize at some point, and I think they will probably want that, obviously having a token as an incentive mechanism for other parties that you don't trust to actually stake it and have collateral to be able to, come in as a validator is obviously like extremely useful, right? I mean, you could imagine, I think Sandeep like said it, he was comparing basically the inflation that you need at the layer one level to basically keep the validators, honest in terms of rewards, and the L2s. I mean, you can, this is something we've thought of is like, if Circle or Robinhood or Coinbase, they actually require a KYC for the validators, right? And they basically handpick like institutions. You probably don't even need a token, right? Like if you're JP Morgan and you say, hey, I'm going to give you like a validator spot, you're going to validate the transactions, but like you're fully KYC'd, right? If you do something wrong, I'm basically going to sue you. You probably don't need a token, right? And so, and that I think is actually a path that some of these networks are going to take. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see.
Not only do you not need a token, maybe you don't need a blockchain. Let's just do a database.
That is also like a good point. I think still like if you can have a database road like in Solidity, like EVM compatible and plug into other blockchains, I think that's still useful. But yeah, that's definitely a good point.
Well, I really enjoy how every 5-6 years we have this private blockchains versus public blockchains versus quasi-private blockchains debate. And I do think that over the course of this cycle, we will see a lot of people throw a lot of stuff at the wall, and then kind of the liquidity will all dry up and a lot of it will like blow away like dust in the wind. And then we'll end up with like a few layer ones and maybe a handful of layer twos, and then a lot of sunk capital into projects that don't work. So, but in aggregate, probably more value. That's my general stance. Okay, well, enjoy the conversation with Sandeep Nailwal. I hope you all learned something about Polygon. And Lorenzo, thanks for clarifying a few confusing issues in the blockchain for me. And we'll see you or enjoy the interview. Sandeep Nailwal, welcome to FYI, the For Your Innovation podcast. Sandeep, co-founder of Polygon, it started as a humble sidechain and is now powering like half Web3. Kind of explain to us, what is Polygon? Why does it exist? And don't force us to kind of install a MetaMask wallet in order to understand the explanation. Please go ahead, Sandeep. Why are you here? Why is Polygon here?
Polygon is the execution layer. What we say is Polygon is the execution layer of Web3. When I say execution, I mean where the business applications can execute their business logic. We all know that the blockchain started with with providing the trust. Like you remove the trust on a human person, but you remove and replace the trust with the network which is run by thousands and thousands of people, right? Or nodes, which is Ethereum and Bitcoin came up with that, right? But it comes with a cost. When you have thousands and thousands of nodes running the same computation, you can't have a lot of computation. So what you do computation, that is execution of this business logic at a separate layer, which is we call the execution layer. And then you use the trustless guarantees of a layer one like Bitcoin or Ethereum to provide the trustlessness and decentralization guarantees, whereas you do the execution on the layer 2 or execution layer. Layer 2 is a misnomer, but we want to say execution layer, right? So Polygon is currently, as you said, but is also trying to be the execution layer where the business logic, the applications will reside. That's what Polygon is doing. It has a flagship chain, Polygon POS, which literally, in terms of daily active users, is daily one of the top 3 chains all the time in terms of stable coin transfers, payments. It is absolutely, conquering the world right now, especially LATAM and Southeast Asia. It has like 70-80% of the market share in terms of their stable coins, individual stable coins and all. And then, Polygon also has these other, this is like a shared compute where anybody can come and run their applications and run their business logic. Then we have a dedicated compute, product called AggLayer, where institutions can launch their own chains, right? Having the same guarantees, but their own chains. So the large institutions OKX exchanges, AggLayer to, Lumia, Wilder World, lot of applications and teams are doing that.
You say L2 is kind of a misnomer. You'd prefer it to be called the execution layer. If I look at Polygon, people will say, well, this is a side chain, but now you're kind of migrating to be kind of a hybrid side chain L2. Can you explain even one at a high level what that means, and then describe the technological evolution of Polygon and why it's going to Polygon 2.0 and what this all means in terms of ability to, again, execute and provide kind of guarantees of security along the way?
It's been super interesting because you've been in this space now, Polygon, forever, like kind of the first scaling solutions. You started with the POS blockchain. You guys launched like a ZK EVM, which is like a zero knowledge powered L2. You have the AggLayer, which is this framework to aggregate, communication and value transfer between these L2s. And so I think it'd be super good to understand like why these steps and kind of the roadmap and where you guys are going.
Yeah. So the core thesis behind that is, just like we have seen in mobile phones and any other kind of compute, the compute requirements keep on increasing, right? And there will be never a place where you'll say, okay, now we have enough compute in the world, enough computers in the computer, enough servers, we don't need for more applications, all that. We see like when we used our mobile phones, when we used to have 1 GB RAM and maybe like 16 GB memories. Today everybody has like 512 MB. Still the phone memories will get full, RAM will be full, and all the same thing is going to happen with this blockchain compute also. So we have a thesis that you need infinite amount of compute on this. Now a single chain only provides certain amount of compute, which is Polygon POS. It competes with chains like Base, Solana and all that, where there is a shared compute environment. Everybody can do the transactions in one single environment. Then the AggLayer that you said is a dedicated compute environment where people, projects, startups, enterprises can launch their own chains, which is completely dedicated to themselves. Now, a particular business like Stripe can come and can say that we are launching our own chain, but it will have shared compute also. That's fine. But the point is, it is compute created by a particular single party, right? And how they use it, what's the business model, it's completely up to them. So to summarize, Polygon is a multi-chain environment which aims to achieve infinite amount of compute, because we assume that the entire financial infrastructure is going to get converted into a blockchain infrastructure. And We believe that the compute requirements will be infinite. So we offer two kinds of compute. One is a shared compute, which is Polygon POS chain, which is like a liquidity hotspot where billions of dollars of stable coins are there, payments are happening, enterprises are like Stripe literally right now processes the largest amount of volume on Polygon POS. Then we have the dedicated compute environment, which is built using AggLayer, and people can launch their multiple chains. But the problem is when you launch this dedicated compute, your chains become fragmented. There is no liquidity on your chains. So AggLayer tries to combine the liquidity in one single place so that these isolated chains can also have liquidity flowing to them. That is the simple explanation of Polygon. It's a trustless execution layer, provides shared and dedicated compute. Shared compute is Polygon POS, our popular Polygon chain, the purple chain, people know it. And the second one is this AggLayer, which allows or which enables people to create conducive dedicated compute.
Is the key to, is the pitch, are you making a pitch basically to the developers, the Stripes of the world, being like, hey, here's you can come to this platform and you can develop on it, and you can either develop to Polygon POS, or you can, if you think it's strategically in your best interest to develop your own chain, you can go onto the AggLayer, and then they basically come to you because, hey, we know we can do it here. Is that the right way to think about it?
You absolutely nailed it on its head. This is exactly the pitch. The pitch to the institutions, the large apps, the fintechs, when we go, the pitch is very simple. That here is this dedicated compute or shared compute, which you can pick up, and it takes you 5 days, maybe a week or 2 weeks to launch your applications on top of it. You don't need to do much. If you are okay with a shared compute environment where other things are also happening and you have certain amount of chain block times and all that, right? But you know that you are in a shared pool of compute resources. Other thing is, if it's too strategic for you, if you want to have, you think that you can bring in millions and millions of users of your own, and you want that, high amount of SLAs, like as in the service quality, guarantees, as well as you want to have the dedicated capacity for your use case, then you go with AggLayer and launch your own chains. That's the very simple one, and it makes the experimentation for the enterprises also step by step. Like you don't need to launch your dedicated compute environment immediately. Use the shared compute, the Polygon purple chain, POS chain, whatever people call it with different names. Use that to start your business. And if you see that this is growing, then you move to a dedicated compute. But the big enough businesses can directly go to the dedicated compute.
From the lay observer's perspective, not experts like you two, my gosh, does the competitive landscape seem messy right now? It seems like every week I read about another level 1 being launched, and then it's a level 2 migrating to a level 1. Circle has Arc, and then Coinbase launched Base, and kind of individual applications are doing their own level 2. How do I and how do you just process all the strategic jockeying that's going on, and then position Polygon to get in front of the liquidity that I think we all believe is going to come? What do you think the user approaching this market, where they're saying, oh my gosh, there's so many options out there, how do they know where to go, and what are they actually even looking for, from transaction throughput to security guarantee to lowest transaction fee? How do we think about the competitive landscape?
It depends on which lens you are looking from. If you are looking from a lens of an average user, all you need to look on is that what app you are using and how the user experience of the app is. If the user experience is smooth, you don't care which chain it is, where it is, whether the liquidity is fragmented or not, you don't care, you are using an application. So that's the user perspective. If you are looking from a developer's perspective, then it's a very then the perspective for you is that it's like AWS. So for as a user, when you and me are using Riverside, which is hosted on AWS, I and you are not thinking as users. We are not thinking which database they are using in the background. Is it Postgres, or is it like MySQL, or they are using Redis or whatever, S3 for storage and all that, right? We are not thinking about it. We are simply using an app. For users, it should be like that.
Actually, last week, I was very sensitive to the fact that they were using AWS. I was
Yes.
very, very, very aware that they were using AWS because suddenly it wasn't
And
working.
the good part is that as far as that happens, like, once or twice, once every 2 years, still okay. But it starts happening again and again, then I think we'll have a problem. Then as a user, you have to get into that. But I think again, like, the users, the applications again will need to do. If that happens second time within 6 months, most of the applications, I think Amazon would know that, that outage must have led to billions of dollars of future revenue loss for this thing, because everybody, like including us, including any consumer app builder, they are like, okay, let's have the fail safe on other things also. So other compute also they'll be doing. So the user side, I was saying that user side, user don't care. The developers, they do care. And for the developers, they have to see what kind of, like, users they are expecting, what kind of fees do they expect their users to pay for the gas fees, because if their users are paying gas fees these days, the gas fees has gone down to sub-cent levels. So if their users can pay sub-cent fees, sure, no problem, then they can build on a shared chain. If they are building a game and they think that the user should not pay any fees, I will pay for the fees, then you better not go to a shared blockchain, because you have to pay the dollar amount of the gas fees, and that, the bill looks bigger and blah, blah, blah. And so you might want to do like a dedicated chain of your own where you control the gas fees. You can even have a zero gas fees. But then you have to see how you will insource the liquidity. Then you have to think about on-ramp, off-ramps, cross-chain bridges and whatnot, right? So this is the developer side. This is the developer side of it. Now, you look at the same complication from an investor and speculator point of view, like not speculator, but investor point of view. Then you have to think about, like, how these things are making value. Like like right now, it feels like, the shared chains, which is basically the L1s in a way, they are being perceived as the higher value, because some of them might have the ability to compete with Ethereum, which has a $500 billion value, whereas the L2s right now, the L2 chains are not being seen particularly high value in terms of their valuation and whatnot. So those are the different considerations that you have to see the competitive landscape. But primarily in these chains, like there are hundreds of chains, but where the users are, in terms of L1s, which I think of settlement environments, I see Bitcoin and Ethereum, where people can absolutely trust a sovereign resistant, like a sovereign, like, China or US, even if they are at, if they would be loggerheads, or India, for example, wants to reserve or save $100 billion of their international treasury, they should be able to do it. That kind of sovereign resistance only Bitcoin and Ethereum has, and that's why I consider them as the settlement layers, right? Or the trust layers. Then there is execution layer. Execution layers, primarily you have chains like Solana, Polygon POS, Base, Arbitrum One, BNB, Tron for stable coins. These six chains primarily on the shared markets are pretty big. And then you have the dedicated compute environments. On dedicated compute environments, you have Arbitrum Orbit, which Robinhood is using. The very good stack, very good team. Similarly, you have Polygon Polygon CDK, where people are using, and now we added like the popular OP stack also inside the CDK only, so you can launch your OP stack chain with AggLayer connected. So in this dedicated compute environment, you have Polygon, Arbitrum, and I would say Optimism as three main players, and that's the overall competitive landscape.
Sandeep, how do you guys think, you talked about value accrual, the L2s, that they're not they're not perceived like very valuable right now, and I agree. One of the main reasons is the L2s are paying very, very cheap rent to Ethereum, right, to secure kind of the data. But also, like, on the user side, the fees are extremely low, right? Which is good, which has brought like a lot of users in general. And so on one side, the revenue is very low. Like how do you envision that to evolve over time? Do you think L2s are going to be like good businesses and they're actually going to produce like cash flows? Do you think we're gonna, the fees are gonna go to, we're gonna decrease the fees by orders of magnitudes, and it doesn't really matter how many users we have, it's always gonna be very little? Like, how do you think about that? Or do you think it's not even, it's not even useful actually to have like a cash flow generative L2? Like right now, Ethereum is not generating a lot of revenue, but it's very valuable. So how do you think about that?
Yeah. So, in crypto markets, I think most of these L1s are also not generating value. It's more of a perception and narrative value. For example, as base, for example, which is an L2, is generating larger amount of gas fees than many L1s, right? And only the top 2 or 3 L2s can say they are generating more fees. Similarly, on the L2 side, the in terms of the daily active users and the user activity and the TVL, these are much bigger than L1s, right? Many L1s. Like, for example, I gave an example a few days back on a tweet that Hedera hash graph, which is an L1, right, which has probably 1,000th of users of, let's say, Polygon or Arbitrum or Optimism, any of these L2s you can say. But the market value of Hedera hash graph is bigger than Polygon, Optimism, and Arbitrum combined, not even one single, right? And the adoption wise, it's probably one by one. I don't even think you can put an order of magnitude. It's like 5 orders of magnitude less
But
than what.
that's right now. How do you think it's going to be in 5 years? Like, are you guys at Polygon focused on, hey, like we should be like a profitable L2, or that's not really, a concern for you guys, or something you're focused on?
See, I think like every L2 right now is doing the same thing that any Web2 startup has lived by, right? Initially, you don't care about making a lot of profits. You want to get as many users as possible, make the users being there a habit. Once the user will be there, long term, you can have the profits. Like, this is how any tech business has built in the past, especially the consumer business. And I think this is what we are going to see for the blockchains also, that lot of blockchains have very low gas fees. These gas fees can also go like easily 10x higher than here, but nobody wants to cannibalize their usage right now. People want to go, like, right now, for example, on Polygon POS we process around 5 million daily transactions, and we probably want to go to maybe 20 to 25 million daily transactions before thinking about like any kind of gas fees or gas fees accrual and whatnot, right? The simple goal is keep getting the users right now, make it the best, the fastest, and the best possible avenue for doing these transactions, and then later on think about the value accrual. That's the thought process currently.
Hey, could you talk about the Stripe partnership in particular? It looks like Stripe's doing more volume on you than on other chains. Is it that, hey, this is a transaction layer that has basically very low fee for us that attracted them to you, and then as good execution? Is that the right way to think about it? And, in some ways it's like Visa and MasterCard are giant global businesses. Stripe's out here saying, hey, you can basically execute much less expensively on stable coins, and then they're using you to drive that volume. Both, how does that then position Polygon for kind of like strategically for the future if you're essentially giving away the economics on that particular relationship in order to gain share?
Yeah. So, like, for example, Stripe, we don't really have a direct, partnership where they are supposed to do XYZ amount of volume on Polygon and all that. They are just choosing it because Polygon POS is very heavily entrenched and connected chain across the industry, right? Whatever environment you look at, whether it's like exchanges, on-ramp, off-ramp providers, many, market makers, liquidity providers, DEX aggregators, everywhere Polygon POS is very strongly connected. And I think that is why, Stripe finds it easy that this is the most connected as well as the most cost effective chain. and the users already have dollars in their addresses on this chain. And I think that is why Stripe is using it. And what we believe is long term, when enough number of users have their balances on this particular chain, and it's kind of annoying to move your balance from one chain to another, and if the chain is working good enough, I think long term it will create a habit between the users, and the businesses will also see at the end they have to pay this processing fees somewhere, right? Whether this chain or that chain. So for somebody like Stripe, doesn't really matter as far as the user experience is good for them. So that's where we feel that in the long run the moats will be created.
How do you feel Stripe has announced, obviously, like Tempo, it's their dedicated L1. Circle has announced Arc. We have, I was just talking the other day to the team building Canton Network, which is kind of another, RWA focused L1. It does seem, Sandeep, like a lot of these companies, like we've built a lot of things during the last 10 years, right? Cryptography, like protocols, frameworks, consensus network. It seems like, the infrastructure is mature enough. And now, these companies that have a lot of distribution are just coming and taking everything we've built and launching their own dedicated blog space. How do you think about that in terms of, I guess, like competitive dynamics and also the raw distributions that these companies have and that they can use to attract kind of activity on their blockchains?
Yeah. So I definitely see that some of these in crypto world, it's called like corpo chains, corporation chains, and the corporation chains might end up doing well. My only like one strong disconnect there is that they are all trying to do an L1, and we can already see in the crypto native world, because when you make an L1, you have to have hundreds or thousands of nodes basically, which can actually simultaneously run the nodes and process everything. And then and only then you can say that, okay, this chain is decentralized or trustless enough, right? And for that, you have to give them inflation, right? For example, Solana, I think has around 5 to 6% inflation every year, which means that roughly $6 billion on their current valuation they give to the validators to secure the network. And many would argue that that is also like that also funds a local. This is like at a much lower scale. This is true for Polygon validators also. There are 105 validators, even though it's like a kind of a commit chain to Ethereum, and it derives a lot of security from Ethereum. But still, Polygon spends around 1% of its supply for the validator rewards. Now, the same thing is going to happen with Stripe and Arc also. But compare that to any L2 chain like Base, for example, right? Or the Polygon, like, one of Polygon's incubated project called Katana, or, Arbitrum one. They don't have to spend this millions of dollars in fees, like in validator fees, which goes in the token, which gets gubs back into the market with the dumps into the market, because they are driving from the security from Ethereum. So I strongly believe also that many of these corpo chains eventually, but if this is always a painful journey, but in next 3 to 5 years, you will see a lot of these corpo chains actually switching back to being L2s on Ethereum, right? Like, there's no need of them. Whoever is trying to do a chain to support their business. Now, Stripe's Tempo chain is a slightly different ball game. Why? Because I don't think it's like Stripe's chain. It's like Stripe is one of the partners in this. The chain is led by Paradigm, which is like a full-blown crypto player. And I think Paradigm's point of view, or Paradigm's strategy on this would be to create a chain which can, rival or which can compete with Ethereum, especially being EVM. So build it like something like Solana, like it's like faster and has more throughput, but is also EVM based. So it's easy to, poach the EVM developers to there. And then I'm pretty sure in 1 to 2 years, the chain is going to come out as like we are trying to create the L1 as Ethereum L1 as a settlement environment. And that's a different ball game than a corporate chain. But if you see, like, for example, Ant Financial announced 4 days back, they launched an L2. We are in talks with at least 10 to 12 large institutions. Like large means globally known institutions. Everybody, agrees that they are, because they are not crypto native. They just want trustless compute for them. They are all going for L2. But anybody who is a crypto native player, like Circle, I would also argue is also a crypto native player. And, Paradigm specifically, Circle chain, though, I do feel that this is like, long term, it might also, become or almost function like an L2. But Tempo is actually a full-blown effort to build an L1 which can compete with Ethereum. And I think their design choice, according to their strategy, is probably correct. And they are trying to achieve a different thing than any other corporate chain. So corporate chains will be L2. But we went into the L2, L1. I think the question was, how do we feel as an L1 or as a chain, compute provider, execution layer provider about these corporate chains? The answer is that yes, Stripe, once they have their own chain where they have their skin in the game and all that, they might move a lot of this activity to that chain. But you have to also see that Stripe as a fintech would also have hundreds of competitors in the market. Hundreds of banks are also there. And all of them, as capitalism has it, all of them will try to counter position. Like anybody who is in any form is a Stripe competitor or even client, then Stripe's competitor will also offer something which will be not on the Stripe chain and all that. And for an institution, somebody will have to build something like AggLayer where the money can move around between different chains. So the corporate chains, as good as they sound for their own captive internal distribution, I think the market dynamics end up playing like that, the other parties don't adopt that, right? So one of the biggest example of this is for example, Telegram's chain, like Ton chain, right? Now, there can be multiple arguments that, right now, the adoption there compared to the massive distribution of Telegram, which is 900 million to 1 billion users, the Ton chain has not become that big yet, right? And one could argue that might be a reason because it's a little bit harder to build on Ton and, the developer community is still growing there. But other way could be that generally a lot of other projects or, any like large institutions, maybe they don't want to be building on, let's say, a chain which is built by another institution, right? Which is, let's say, in some places competitive with them and all that. So I think those dynamics play out there. So while, it's definitely, for a chain builder like us is definitely, something to watch out for. But we have seen some of these experiments not play out as they were anticipated. So we would wait. For example, Base is another example. Like Base, many people said that Base will also probably will not become big, but Base ended up becoming very big, right, that way. So, only time will tell how the markets behave to that.
It's definitely a lot of cross currents. If you look forward for Polygon, call it 5 years forward, what does success look like for Polygon? What do you envision as the future, both of Polygon and the industry on a 5-year forward basis?
Yeah. So in 5 years, I would say that, Polygon chain should have like probably 20 to 50 million transactions a day. And if it's processing, if it has a total TVL of 20 to anything between 20 to 50 billion dollars, that means total value secured on Polygon POS chain, that will be, I would consider that decent success. And also on the AggLayer side, I would expect to have like strongly closely coordinating probably 100 to 500 chains on AggLayer. And those are very closely interoperating within the network, and the liquidity is almost, kind of, as we say, unified between these 500 chains is what I would look for in the next 5 years.
In terms of metrics that you look at on a day-to-day basis, transaction activity the more important metric for you, or total value locked, or the number of chains? Like,
Yeah, I would say total value secured on the chain and the number of transactions that are happening. Of course, the fees is also an important section, but right now we want to make sure that the fees stay like this while the whole world is being onboarded onto the blockchains. So my focus of increasing the gas fees on the chain 5 times is not by increasing the fees 5 times, is by increasing the capacity and the throughput 5 times.
well, Sandeep, thanks so much for coming on FYI. We look forward to the world continuing to build on Polygon and a lot of transaction throughput to flow your way.
Absolutely. Hoping lots of transactions, payments, and stable coins. We are able to create a strong dent on the global markets there.
Thanks, Sandeep.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
For Mark Invest, this has been FYI, the For Your Innovation podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Sandeep and Lorenzo. For one, I really think that the entire competitive landscape is somewhat a flux right now. And I think that there is going to be, I would expect you'll see more announcements from more teams trying to do more stuff here rather than less. And it'll fragment certainly the developer community and perhaps not as much the user community over time. The reason why is because there is such a huge slug of money that is going to move on to DeFi from institutions over the next few years. It's very clear that stable coins are in some ways a killer app, not only to go after Visa and MasterCard, but as a tip of the spear that allows a lot more traditional financial assets to be blockchainized, to coin a term. And so, if we think trillions of dollars of value is going to be secured on the blockchain in kind of DeFi applications over the next 5 years, which is still, a vanishingly small percentage, single-digit percent penetration of kind of the global financial assets out there. It represents an extraordinarily meaningful opportunity that companies and developer teams are going to try to get in front of. So I would expect more noise, not less. And ultimately, I think that there are really strong network effect dynamics in play here. And so returns to distribution are going to be really valuable, as well as returns to liquidity, just occupying a spot where you become the default settlement layer, the default execution layer, should provide, with reasonable execution, a lot of strategic value to those developer teams and companies that can sit in front of that spot. So interesting spot to think about. And I think it'll, the people who are really in the crosshairs are actually the kind of risk transformers that are going to get displaced by public blockchains and the transaction facilitators. I think it's telling that Stripe is saying to their customers, hey, you can clear and settle through the credit card networks for 2.3%, or you can clear and settle through us on a stable coin for 1.5 for the mid or large enterprise that's facilitating a lot of transactions. That'll be really attractive. That could be, hundreds of millions of dollars in savings for some of these institutions. And they are happy to get out from the under the thumb of Visa, MasterCard. And so that alone will drive a lot of people to shift over. And in concert with then consumers beginning to hold these stable coins in digital wallets where they can pay for things directly in this way, will kind of prime the pump of the entire ecosystem. So I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please follow us, subscribe on whatever podcasting platform you prefer. Personally, I like Spotify, and rate us and give us comments in our various social channels. Thanks.
ARK believes that the information presented is accurate and was obtained from sources that ARK believes to be reliable. However, ARK does not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information, and such information may be subject to change without notice from ARK. Historical results are not indications of future results. Certain of the statements contained in this podcast may be statements of future expectations and other forward-looking statements that are based on ARK's current views and assumptions, and involve known and unknown risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results, performance, or events to differ materially from those expressed or implied in such statements.